When we think of races in the turbo hybrid era of Formula One that Red Bull can be competitive at, three spring to mind immediately: Monaco, Hungary, Singapore. But all season, Max Verstappen has been adamant that Mexico should be added to that list, and he was true to his word this weekend, winning the Mexican Grand Prix in fine fashion. Ben Anderson and Stuart Codling are here to discuss the weekend's action with me. Great win for Max, great win for Red Bull. Was this as simple as a bit of engine convergence because of the race taking place at high altitude and suddenly Red Bull's got the best package on the grid? Or is there a bit more to it than that?
Seems like it might be. I think was it 22% power drop you get because of the effects of there being less oxygen to go round. And obviously that doesn't affect the ERS deployment, so you still have your 160 horsepower from that. So it's just basically your internal combustion engine that's suffering. And that is the area where Renault themselves have said this is a weak point. They're going to completely change the ICU for next season. So I think it probably is a little bit of convergence, because if you take 22% off all of them, that narrows the gap
slightly. They lose the least amount, don't they, compared to everybody else. Ben, we always hear about the Red Bull chassis being great. And maybe in the first year of these new regulations, the team didn't make a great start with it, but there can't be any doubt that in 2018 that car has been phenomenal, regardless of maybe the engine holding it back a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the extra elements at play in this particular weekend, brakes struggled a lot. I think Ferrari running a special disc to try and get extra cooling. All the teams were struggling. I think Sergio Perez retired, didn't he, because of a brake problem. It's very hard to get enough air through them. But Red Bull have always had really strong brakes, and a lot of the track layout is slow corners with heavy braking zones, so that's a place where they can make time on the opposition. And also they're running their full downforce package, even though it's a track with a massive long main straight, because of the way the altitude works and the air reduces the effect of the downforce producing devices. They can run full downforce spec and not achieve the same levels of drag. So Red Bull always are strong when they're running their full downforce package, as you mentioned, at Monaco, Hungary, Singapore, those places. So that's why Mexico kind of fits with that profile. And imagine also then they can still go like a rocket down the straight. They're not held back on that long straight by running all that downforce. So,
and to think they were thinking about this as far back as Singapore, when Christian Horner said we're going to take probably an engine penalty for the Russian Grand Prix, so that we can get a B-spec engine back in the pool to go for Mexico, because that's our last remaining shot at a victory this season.
Now, Sebastian Vettel mentioned over the weekend that he referred to a massive turbo on the Renault engine. So do we think that there's maybe a little bit more to it than just the internal combustion engine, and that there's actually maybe the altitude could actually play to what might be some strengths of the Renault unit that we don't normally get to see?
Yeah, if it does have a larger turbo, then it's channeling a lot more of less into. I'm starting to sound like an episode of W1A now, aren't I? But if you do have a big turbo, then axiomatically you are going to be forcing more air through, squashing it more. So if that air is less dense, you're having a greater effect on it in terms of the charge.
Now, Ben, it was great to see three teams in the mix for victory, and in fact by Sunday it turned out Mercedes weren't in the mix for victory. Valtteri Bottas was lapped, and Lewis Hamilton, I think, crossed the line about 4 seconds before Max Verstappen took the checkered flag at the end of the race. Very close, yeah. And Lewis did ask on the radio at one point, am I going to be lapped? Which you don't hear a man normally ask when he's about to win a world championship. But so we saw a three-team battle this weekend. In some ways, does this actually put more pressure now on Honda, who are going to be supplying Red Bull next year? Because we've had emphatic proof at the end of the 2018 season that Red Bull have got at least a chassis that can match Mercedes and Ferrari, and arguably a better car. So suddenly, does any grace period Honda was hoping for at the start of 2019 go away with a result like this?
I don't think they ever had a grace period for the start of 2019. I think Mexico's the first race we've had for a while where you can see the evidence of Red Bull's strength, but we've known that they have a great car and that the engine has predominantly been holding it back. So Honda know they need to deliver from the start of next year. Red Bull don't expect to go backwards. They've said since signing up with Honda that they expect to achieve at least the same level they've got now with Renault as a starting point, and then hopefully the extra resource, commitment, clever ideas perhaps that Honda have will take them forward and allow them to challenge Ferrari and Mercedes. So I don't really think the Mexican Grand Prix changes anything for Honda, but it's perhaps another nudge, another reminder that, you know, this is a team with a car and a concept that is capable of running at the very front if the engine is up to the job.
Yeah, you look at where Red Bull have been weak over the past few seasons. You had the 2014 pretty much per se, when Adrian Newey sort of threw his toys out the pram and said, well, this is an engine formula, not an aero formula, I'm not interested anymore. You know, maybe argued at the beginning of 2017 season when he was off prattling around designing road cars because he was bored with Formula One, and you saw that when he got involved again, he sort of energised the aero department, and it sort of all clicked back into gear again. So there's no reason to expect that they won't start next year strongly from a car point of view. I think Honda's weakness has been traditionally that they overestimate their own competence at things, because, you know, they have done brilliant things. They've got massively well-resourced engineers, some great ideas. The trouble is that they don't often admit the fact that they're wrong when they are wrong. We have, you know, our technical expert Gary Anderson, who worked with them in the Mugen days, who said he actually had to produce evidence that their engine was not producing as much horsepower as they thought, and wave it in their face and actually sort of grab a few heads, look there, look, before they'd actually grasp the fact that they were underperforming. And the past few years have been very, very dispiriting for them. It's amazing that they're persisting, actually. So, you know, they might just take some steps, but they are still far enough away from the cutting edge that they've got too much of a leap to take to do it all at once. I think if you look at Toro Rosso's performance this year, it's been good, but no great shakes, and it's been very hard to really rigorously measure their performance this season compared with last season when they had a different engine. So,
and they're not far behind,
yeah.
Or not far ahead of where McLaren Honda were on points with the same engine package this year. So, and if you look at Mexico, Honda had difficulties there. You know, they had to go back on a spec because they weren't confident of the reliability, and then they had some problems in terms of installation or putting the engine together. I mean, these are the kind of things that Red Bull can't afford. You know, as you mentioned, there's probably 4 places on the whole calendar where they think they can definitely win if they get everything right, and that's where the pressure really comes in for Honda, because they've not yet, in this phase of their Formula One history, been in a position where they have a realistic chance of winning a Grand Prix, and next year there could be at least 4, and that is a different kind of pressure to supplying midfield teams who are scrapping over a few points.
Yeah, you think Gasly is on his 8th engine this season? I
mean, that's slightly misleading, isn't it? Because they've been using this grace period of 2018 to experiment with the engine concept and some ideas. So I think a lot of those new installations have been, well, we'll just take a penalty because we want to try this concept and see if it works, use the Toro Rosso team as a test bed. So I don't think the fact they've used so many engines indicates poor reliability per se, but it also doesn't indicate strong reliability, and that is going to continue to be a big question mark with Honda. But from Red Bull's point of view, they've got used to poor reliability with Renault, so they're kind of swapping like for like almost in that sense.
Formula One shouldn't really be a process of throwing something at the wall to see whether it sticks or not, should it? And I think one thing you can say about this year has been the relationship between the team and Honda has been better. You haven't seen Toro Rosso throwing Honda under the bus to quite the same extent that McLaren were. And I think
different pressures though, wasn't it? I mean, you know, the McLaren project was they threw everything behind Honda being the power that would thrust them back to the very front of Formula One and become champions again. Whereas for Toro Rosso, that was never an expectation, and it never realistically is going to be an expectation there. They're ready to service the main team. So it's probably been a good environment for Honda to kind of find its feet again, recover some confidence. But the real test comes next year when they're partnered once again with a top team, or perhaps for the first time with a top team, or certainly one that now we know is capable of producing a car that can run at the very front. And
there is a way, because the Japanese culture is very, very different from what we might say the European culture, the way tasks are approached, the whole way an organisation is structured, the way you ask for things to be done. It takes a little bit of expertise in those rules of engagement. I think part of the problem McLaren had was that they had people who weren't really schooled in the Japanese way of doing things and expected instant results. Whereas the Japanese methodology of working is very much, you seek a consensus, you defer to people higher up even when you know they're wrong. So things move a little bit more slowly. And also you have this appalling fact that you are 8 hours away from where they are. So they're knocking off for the day when you're knocking on. So any communications you want to make inherently has a delay. What we've had this year is a team principal at Toro Rosso, Franz Tost, who's worked in Japan when he was working with Ralf Schumacher. He knows how things work, so he doesn't come into the relationship with any false expectations of the timescale in which things can be achieved. And he knows how to be diplomatic and how to fit into that Japanese working culture. Will that still happen when you've got Christian Horner, who's a man used to saying what he thinks and that being instantly reported in all media outlets? It's going to be a bit more tricky.
And also, Red Bull are going to be more demanding than Toro Rosso. It's easy to say now.
The pressure's back on next year, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In terms of expectations are there immediately.
Red Bull, they're in it to win it, and it's easy for them to say now, I will give Honda the space, and if they need some compromises to get their engine working, we'll work around it. But when it comes to the crunch, and they need to put this new aero concept on the car to make sure they're in the hunt with Ferrari and Mercedes on these particular tracks, are they going to maintain that same position? I would wager probably not. I mean, this is the same tensions that undid the McLaren-Honda relationship in terms of we need to do this for the car, and therefore you've got to compromise. Well, we need to do this for the engine, so can you compromise on the car? They will come back, because although this is a works partnership, you've still got one entity working in one place, you've got another entity working in another. It's not Ferrari and Mercedes completely homogenised. And even with those homogenised relationships at those factory teams, it took a long time, a lot of effort to get that working practice right. It's not easy, even when you've got your engine department just down the road. So when your engine department's the other side of the world, that can only get exponentially harder, I imagine.